The air changed about 30 feet down. That's the first thing I noticed, how it went from January cold to something else entirely. Not warmer exactly, just different. Stale. The kind of air that's been sitting in one place for too long, recycling itself through vents nobody's cleaned in years. I followed Chad Taylor down the metal stairs, my steel toes clanging against the grating with each step. The sound echoed weird in the shaft, came back at wrong angles. "Watch the handrail," Chad said without looking back. "Get slick around level 2. He was right. Condensation made the painted metal slippery under my palm. I gripped tighter, kept my eyes on his supervisor jacket ahead of me. The fluorescent work lights got sparser the deeper we went. By the time we hit the bottom of the stairwell, there was maybe one bulb every 20 feet, throwing these long shadows that made the tunnel stretch out forever in both directions. I'd expected something cleaner, I guess. More official. The job posting said maintenance work on emergency systems, lighting, ventilation, basic electrical, city job, union benefits, $28 an hour to start. After what I'd been through the past 2 years, watching my restaurant circle the drain and finally disappear, it seemed like salvation. A way back to something stable. The tunnel looked nothing like salvation. Graffiti covered the lower walls, though most of it was old. Faded tags from the 90s, maybe earlier. Water stains ran down the concrete in rust-colored streaks. The floor was this poured concrete with drainage channels cut into it, and those channels held maybe an inch of dark water that reflected the overhead lights in broken pieces. "Lower Wacker extension," Chad said, stopping where the stairwell opened into the main tunnel, closed to through traffic in '93. Still technically part of the system, though, still needs maintenance. I nodded. Tried to look like I belonged here, like I wasn't having second thoughts about the whole thing. Chad pulled a laminated card from his jacket pocket, held it out to me. "Standard protocols," he said. "Read it now. Memorize it before your shift starts." I took the card. It was the size of a playing card, hole punched in the corner with a metal ring through it so you could clip it to your belt. Both sides were covered in small printed text, single-spaced, 12 numbered items. Not what I'd expected. I'd done construction work before the restaurant, maintenance gigs here and there. Safety protocols usually meant stuff about lockout-tagout procedures, fall protection, confined space entry permits. OSHA regulations printed in that specific bureaucratic language that made everything sound both urgent and boring at the same time. This wasn't that. Rule 1 seemed normal enough. Always carry backup batteries for your headlamp. Test both primary and backup before descending. If both fail simultaneously, return to surface immediately via the most direct route. Reasonable. Basic electrical work safety. I'd worked jobs where flashlight failure could mean real trouble. Crawl spaces, attics, utility tunnels. Nothing weird about that. I kept reading. Rule 2. Do not acknowledge anyone you encounter who is not wearing an official CTA identification badge. My eyes stuck on that one for a second. Do not acknowledge. Not report unauthorized persons or challenge trespassers. Just don't acknowledge them. Pretend they're not there. Rule 3. If you hear children's voices, ignore them completely. They are not real, and responding will only make the sounds persist. The temperature in the tunnel felt colder suddenly. I looked up at Chad. He was checking something on his phone, face lit blue by the screen. Completely calm, like he'd just handed me a weather report. I went back to the card. Rules 4 through 11 were variations on the same theme. Don't follow sounds of dripping water if they seem to be moving. Don't enter any room where the lights are already on. If you see someone who looks exactly like yourself, leave the area and report to your supervisor. Never work alone below level 3. If the ventilation system starts blowing warm air, evacuate immediately. Each one more insane than the last. Then I got to Rule 12. If you hear the 317 train, Find the nearest emergency alcove immediately and face the wall until the sound passes completely. Do not turn around. Do not look at the tracks. Do not acknowledge anyone who speaks to you while the train is present." My hands had started sweating. The laminated card felt slippery between my fingers. "The 3:17 train," I said. My voice came out quieter than I'd intended. "When does that run?" Chad looked up from his phone. His face showed nothing. No humor, no sympathy, just that flat, professional mask of someone who'd explained this too many times already. "It doesn't," he said. "CTA stopped running trains through this section in '93. I already told you that." "Then why?" "Because you might hear it anyway." He tucked his phone away. "You might hear a lot of things down here. The rules tell you how to handle each situation. Follow them exactly, no improvising." I stared at the card, read Rule 12 again. The words didn't change. "This is a joke," I said. "Some kind of hazing thing for new guys." "It's not. These rules are insane. They're necessary." Chad's voice stayed flat. Matter of fact. "City maintains these protocols after losing 3 workers in the past decade. 1 vanished completely, never found the body. The other 2 came out, but they weren't right anymore. 1 kept speaking in some language nobody recognized. Linguists from the university couldn't identify it. The other one just screamed whenever anyone tried to take him above ground. They're both in facilities now. State care." The tunnel felt smaller suddenly. The darkness between the fluorescent lights seemed thicker. "You're serious," I said. "I'm always serious about safety protocols." He gestured at the card. "There's a reason each of those rules exists. Workers who follow them go home at the end of their shifts. Workers who don't—" He shrugged. "Well, you read about what happens." I should have left. Should have handed back the card and the coveralls they'd issued me and walked straight back up those 30 feet to street level. Found a different job. Any different job. But I'd been looking for 4 months already. Sent out maybe 200 applications, got 3 interviews. This was the only offer. The restaurant had failed in the summer of 2020. Outdoor dining couldn't save the numbers. I'd lost everything, the business, my savings, my credit. Moved into a studio apartment in Bridgeport that smelled like mildew and cost $900 a month, which I could barely cover doing delivery driving and odd jobs. My car was 12 years old and needed transmission work I couldn't afford. I was 2 months behind on my electric bill. $28 an hour. Union benefits, health insurance. I couldn't walk away. I read through the rules again, all 12 of them. Let my eyes trace each word, each bizarre instruction. Backup batteries. Don't acknowledge anyone without a badge. Ignore the children's voices. Emergency alcove when you hear the 3:17. "How many emergency alcoves are there?" I asked. Chad's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but something close to it. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone seeing a person choose survival over sanity. "1 every 100 feet in the main tunnels," he said, "marked with yellow reflective tape. You'll learn their locations during your first week. After that, you'll know where they are without thinking about it." I nodded. Clipped the laminated card to my belt next to my multi-tool. "Memorize them before we go any further," Chad said. "I need to know you've got them solid." So I stood there in the entrance to the lower Wacker extension, under flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and wrong, and I committed 12 impossible rules to memory, burned them into my brain through sheer repetition, whispered them to myself until I could recite each one without looking. It took maybe 15 minutes. When I finished, Chad made me repeat them out loud. All 12. I didn't miss a single word. "Good," he said. "Keep that card on you at all times anyway. Sometimes the stress makes you forget. Better to have it as backup." He turned and started walking into the tunnel. After a second, I followed. My first shift in the abandoned tunnels beneath Chicago had officially begun. Chad started walking and I followed, but he stopped after maybe 20 feet and turned back. "Keep reading," he said. "There's more on the back." I'd memorized the first 12, but the card had text on both sides. I flipped it over. Rule 13. Do not acknowledge passengers waiting on defunct platforms. Rule 14. Ignore any conversations heard in empty tunnels. Rule 15. If maintenance lights flicker in sequence, retreat to surface immediately. Rule 16. If anyone asks for directions to demolished stations, provide them without question. That last one sat different than the others. The previous rules were all about avoidance. Don't look, don't listen, don't engage. This one demanded participation. "Questions?" Chad asked. "What's a defunct platform?" "Any platform that doesn't have active service. You'll know 'em when you see 'em. Tile's different. Benches are wrong style. Sometimes there's old advertisements still up on the walls." He shifted his weight, the belt of flashlights clinking. "Marshall Fields, Quincy. The old State Street lower level. They closed some, demolished others. Doesn't matter which is which. You see someone standing there, you keep walking. And the conversations? You'll hear people talking sometimes. Sounds close, sounds real. Nobody's there." His voice stayed flat, bureaucratic. "Keep moving. Don't try to find the source." I looked back at Rule 15. What's it mean, lights flicker in sequence? You'll know it if you see it. Not random flickering. That happens all the time. Wiring's old. Sequential means they go out one after another. Regular pattern coming toward you or going away. He pulled one of the flashlights from his belt, checked it, clipped it back. That happens. You walk straight to the nearest exit. Don't run. Don't stop. Just walk out. And the last one. I read it again. Provide directions without question. Yeah. To stations that don't exist anymore. That's right. The fluorescent light above us buzzed, steady and normal. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. How do I know the directions if they're demolished? Chad reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper, edges soft from handling. He handed it over. Map of the old system. Shows everything that used to be here. Memorize the routes, same as the rules. I unfolded it. The paper was standard printer stock, but the map itself looked scanned from something older. Faded blue lines showing tunnel paths. Stations marked with different symbols for active, closed, and demolished. Quincy Station sat on what used to be the Blue Line extension. 4 stops past where the tunnel currently ended. Marshall Fields was marked as a demolished platform on the Red Line, right under what was now just a maintenance access point. Take it with you, Chad said. Study it tonight, tomorrow. You got 3 days before you work solo. I folded the map and put it in my coverall pocket. The laminated rules card stayed clipped to my belt. Come on, Chad said. I'll show you the supply station. I spent the next 2 nights shadowing Chad, learning the tunnel layout and the actual maintenance work, replacing bulbs in the fluorescent fixtures, checking ventilation grates, documenting water damage in a spiral notebook that lived in a metal lockbox at the supply station. The work itself was straightforward, nothing I hadn't done before in various kitchen facilities. The tunnels were just long concrete hallways with pipes and wiring, drainage channels and access panels. Boring work mostly, which made the rules feel stranger. I memorized the old map the first night back in my studio, tracing the routes with my finger until I could picture the whole system. Quincy Station connected to what was now just Tunnel 17, accessible through the Northwest Passage from the lower Wacker extension. Marshall Fields sat directly above us on the Red Line, marked as a defunct platform with a yellow X on the map. The old State Street lower level branched off in 3 directions, all of them sealed with concrete barriers in 1987, according to the notes in the margin. On my 3rd night, Chad told me I was ready to work solo. Start with Section 4, he said, standing at the bottom of the metal stairs where we'd first entered. 3 fixtures need replacement. I'll be in Section 9 if you need anything. Radio check every 30 minutes. He handed me a walkie-talkie, heavy and solid, with a strip of tape on the back marked with the number 4. I clipped it to my belt opposite the rules card. You remember everything? Yeah. Say it back. I went through all 16 rules without looking at the card. Chad nodded. Good. Get to work. He walked east. I walked west toward Section 4. The Marshall Field's platform sat in the middle of Section 4, a widening in the tunnel where tile work still showed the old station's footprint. The tiles were different here, cream and burgundy instead of the standard white, arranged in an Art Deco pattern that must have looked impressive in the 1940s. Someone had removed the benches and signs, but the basic structure remained, a raised platform area on the south side, the tunnel continuing past it on the north. 2 of the 3 fixtures were over the tunnel proper, standard maintenance. The third hung directly above the platform. I set my toolbox down on the concrete and pulled out the replacement bulbs. The first 2 fixtures took maybe 10 minutes total. Pop the plastic cover, unscrew the dead tube, screw in the new one, replace the cover. The fluorescent buzz filled the tunnel, steady and industrial. The third fixture required standing on the platform itself. I stepped up onto the raised tile area. The surface was dusty but dry, no water damage here. The cream tiles showed their age and hairline cracks, but the pattern was still clear. Geometric flowers in burgundy repeating every 2 feet. I positioned myself under the fixture and opened my toolbox. That's when I heard the footsteps. Distinct, deliberate, shoe leather on concrete, echoing from deeper in the platform area where the tunnel curved away into darkness. Rule 13 sat in my head, clear and specific. Do not acknowledge passengers waiting on defunct platforms. I pulled out the replacement bulb and set it on the platform beside my toolbox. My hands wanted to shake. I didn't let them. The footsteps continued, getting closer. Not running, just walking. Regular pace, steady rhythm. I reached up and popped the plastic cover off the fixture. It came away clean. No screws on this model, just pressure clips. I set it down next to the bulb. The footsteps were maybe 20 feet away now, still approaching. I unscrewed the dead tube, twisting it in the socket. The fluorescent light flickered and went dark. My headlamp compensated automatically, throwing a bright cone of LED light directly in front of me. Don't look. Keep working. I lifted the old tube out of the fixture and bent down to set it in my toolbox. The footsteps stopped. Silence, except for the ventilation system's distant hum and the buzz of the other lights I'd already replaced. I picked up the new bulb. My hands were steady, following the protocol, doing exactly what the rules required. Excuse me. A woman's voice, clear and close, maybe 10 feet away, on the platform with me. Rule 16. If anyone asks for directions to demolished stations, provide them without question. I kept my eyes on the fixture, sliding the new tube into the socket. I need to get to Quincy Station, the woman said. My hands started trembling then, actually shaking hard enough that the bulb rattled in the socket. I twisted it anyway, feeling it lock into place. Quincy Station. Demolished in 1969. I knew the route, I'd memorized it. Northwest Passage from Lower Wacker. Tunnel 17, 4th junction to the left, straight for 200 yards. Northwest Passage, I said. My voice came out steady despite my hands. Take Tunnel 17 at the next junction, 4th left, straight through. Thank you. The footsteps retreated, same steady rhythm, walking away from me back toward the darkness of the defunct platform. I replaced the plastic cover on the fixture, my headlamp beam shaking slightly as I moved. The new fluorescent tube buzzed to life, filling the platform area with cold white light. The footsteps faded completely. I waited, counting to 30 in my head, then 60. Then I turned around. The platform stretched behind me, empty. Cream and burgundy tiles in Art Deco patterns, dust undisturbed except where I'd been standing. And wet footprints. They started about 8 feet from my position, clear and dark against the dusty tile. Women's shoes, maybe size 7, narrow heel. The prints led away from where I'd been working, following the path the footsteps had taken, getting fainter as they went. They ended at the far wall of the platform, the solid concrete barrier that had sealed this section in 1987. The last footprint pressed directly against the wall, toe first, as if someone had walked straight into it and kept going. Chad caught me on my 5th night, just as I was packing up my toolbox at the supply station. He had his laptop bag with him, the kind with reinforced corners that could take a beating, and he gestured toward the metal folding chairs we kept against the wall. "Need to show you something," he said, "about what happens when people don't follow the rules." I sat. The chair's legs scraped against concrete, echoing down the tunnel in both directions. Chad set up his laptop on the supply station's counter, angling the screen so we could both see. The device looked out of place down here, all sleek aluminum against rust-stained metal and chipped paint. He opened a folder labeled Incident Reports and double-clicked a file marked Montgomery A. 03.7.2019. "This was 2 years ago," Chad said. "Guy named Axel Montgomery, lasted about 3 weeks before he got curious." The video player opened, showing 4 camera feeds in a grid layout. Security footage, black and white, timestamps running in the bottom corner. I recognized the tunnels immediately. Same fluorescent fixtures, same water stains, same shadows stretching between pools of light. "Watch the bottom left feed," Chad said. The timestamp read 12:47 a.m., March 17th, 2019. The camera showed a junction I'd walked through during training. 3 tunnels converging at odd angles, creating a space where the ceiling rose about 2 feet higher than the surrounding passages. A figure entered frame from the right tunnel. Young guy, maybe late 20s, wearing the same coveralls I had on now. He walked with his headlamp sweeping side to side, toolbox in his left hand. Axel Montgomery stopped at the junction's center and looked up. The camera angle didn't show what he was looking at, but I knew what had to be there. The old freight elevator shaft. Rule 7 said never to climb into it, and I'd seen the opening during my 2nd night. A vertical tunnel in the ceiling, sealed with a rusted grate that somebody had pried loose decades ago, the metal bent back at angles that would slice your hands if you weren't careful. He'd been asking questions all week, Chad said, about the rules, why certain things were off limits, what actually happened to the workers who disappeared. Chad's finger tapped the laptop's edge. I told him the same thing I told you. Follow the protocols, don't get creative. Collect your paycheck. On screen, Axel set down his toolbox. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and aimed it upward, the beam disappearing into darkness above the camera's view. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just looking up into that shaft. Then he started climbing. The camera captured him gripping the edge of the opening, pulling himself up with surprising ease for someone in steel-toed boots. His legs kicked once, twice, finding purchase on something inside the shaft. Then he was gone, disappearing into the ceiling like water down a drain. The timestamp continued running. 12:49 a.m. 12:50 a.m. His toolbox sat abandoned on the tunnel floor, casting a long shadow under the fluorescent lights. Camera doesn't see inside the shaft, Chad said. We've only got the tunnel feeds, so we wait. He dragged the progress bar forward. The timestamp blurred, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. The toolbox didn't move. No workers passed through the junction. The tunnel looked exactly the same frame after frame, like someone had paused the video, except for the timestamp counting forward. Chad stopped at 3:52 a.m. Here. I leaned closer. The tunnel looked identical. Empty junction, abandoned toolbox, shadows in the same positions. Then movement in the ceiling, legs emerging from the shaft, feeling for the edge. Axel dropped back down into the tunnel, landing in a crouch beside his toolbox. Even in black and white, something looked wrong. He stood slowly, like his joints weren't working right. His headlamp had died. The light that should have created a bright spot on the camera was gone. He picked up his toolbox, stumbled, caught himself against the wall. His free hand went to his face, touching his cheeks, his jaw, his hair. His hair. Fuck, I said. Yeah, Chad said. Axel's hair had grown. Not a little. Not the kind of growth you'd get overnight. His hair hung past his collar, falling around his ears, where in the earlier footage it had been trimmed short. He kept touching it, pulling strands in front of his face like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He started walking, moving in jerky steps back toward the right tunnel where he'd entered. The camera caught him for a few more seconds before he left the frame. The timestamp read 3:54 a.m. Chad closed that video and opened another file. This is the exit camera, surface level door on State Street. The new footage showed a heavy metal door with a push bar, the kind marked emergency exit only. The timestamp read 4:11 a.m., same date. The door burst open and Axel stumbled through, nearly falling onto the sidewalk. Early morning darkness outside, streetlights creating harsh shadows. He stood on the sidewalk with both hands in his hair, pulling at it, looking at the strands between his fingers. A car passed. Axel lurched toward it, waving his arms. The car didn't stop. He turned in a circle, looking at the buildings, the street signs, the sky. His mouth was moving, shouting something the camera couldn't pick up. He pulled out his phone, looked at the screen, dropped it. The phone hit the sidewalk and Axel backed away from it, hands up like it had tried to bite him. He stared at it for a long time, then slowly picked it up again. His thumb moved across the screen. His whole body went rigid. What did he see? I asked. The date, Chad said. He went into that shaft at 12:47 a.m. on March 17th. He came out at 3:52 a.m. same night. 3 hours, give or take. Chad tapped the timestamp on the screen. Except look at the date. I looked. The timestamp read 4:11 a.m., April 3rd, 2019, 17 days. My hands went cold. That's not possible. Yeah, well, Chad closed the laptop. Tell that to Axel. He called me from the street, screaming about his phone being wrong, the date being wrong, everything being wrong. I went and picked him up, brought him back to the office. Chad pulled a file folder from his laptop bag. Physical paperwork, the kind the city still insisted on for incident reports. He opened it to show a medical evaluation form with a Polaroid photo clipped to the corner. The photo showed Axel in fluorescent office lighting, looking directly at the camera. His hair hung in tangled strands past his shoulders. His face looked gaunt, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken. His lips were cracked and peeling. Paramedics said he was severely dehydrated, Chad said. The kind of dehydration you get after weeks without water. His fingernails had grown. His beard had grown. You can see it in the photo. Every physical indicator said he'd been gone for over 2 weeks. I stared at the photo, at Axel's eyes, wide and haunted. He kept insisting it was minutes, Chad continued. Said he climbed into the shaft, found a ladder, went down about 20 feet into some kind of sub-basement. Walked around for maybe 10 minutes, got turned around, came back up. That's all. 10 minutes, maybe 15. But it was 17 days. 17 days on this side, Chad said, however long it felt like for him down there. He closed the folder. He quit the next morning, packed up, moved to Phoenix within a week. I called to check on him about a month later. He answered, but soon as he heard my voice, he started talking about the tunnels borrowing time from people, said he could feel the missing days somewhere in his body, like phantom limbs. Then he hung up. Chad packed the laptop back into his bag, folded the file folder, tucked it away. That's what happens when you violate Rule 7. Maybe other rules do different things. I don't know. Never tested them. Don't plan to. He stood, slinging the bag over his shoulder. You follow the protocols, You go home every morning. You get creative. You end up losing time you can't get back. We clear? We're clear, I said. But I kept thinking about Axel's face in that photo. The way his eyes looked like someone had scooped something essential out of him and replaced it with static. My second week started quiet. Solo shifts, checking routine maintenance, replacing fixtures, documenting water damage. I radioed Chad every 30 minutes like clockwork and heard nothing unusual except the drip of condensation and the hum of ventilation fans. Then Thursday night, 10th day on the job, I got assigned to check air quality sensors near the defunct Adams Street junction. The junction sat at the intersection of 3 closed tunnels, marked on my map with a red circle indicating no active service since 1987. The sensors monitored carbon dioxide and methane buildup, routine safety stuff that required monthly checks and battery replacements. Simple work, in and out in 20 minutes. I reached the junction at 11:43 p.m., my headlamp cutting through darkness that felt thicker than usual. The air quality sensor box was mounted on the wall about chest height, green indicator light showing normal readings. I set my toolbox down and opened the metal housing to check the batteries. That's when the light started. The emergency fixture directly above me flickered once, went out, came back on. The next fixture down the tunnel, 20 feet away, did the same. Flicker, out, on. Then the next one. Same pattern. My hands stopped moving. Battery halfway out of its housing, my fingers gone numb. The lights continued in sequence down the tunnel, each fixture flickering out and back in perfect rhythm, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The pattern moved away from me, traveling deeper into the darkness, one light after another after another. Rule 15. Retreat to surface immediately if maintenance lights flicker in sequence. I dropped the battery. It hit the concrete and rolled into the drainage channel with a small splash. I grabbed my toolbox, didn't bother closing it, tools rattling loose inside, and turned toward the exit route. The lights behind me started. I looked back and saw the sequence reversing, fixtures flickering in order back toward my position. The pattern was closing in from both directions now, moving along both tunnels that formed the junction, converging on where I stood. I ran. My boots hit concrete in heavy rhythms, toolbox banging against my leg, headlamp beam bouncing with each step. The exit was back through the main tunnel, left at the first junction, straight through to the stairwell, maybe 300 feet total. Behind me, a sound built in the darkness. A whistle, low and distant at first, then growing louder with each second. The 317 train, the one that hadn't run through these tunnels in over 27 years. My heart slammed against my ribs. The whistle grew clearer, closer, echoing off concrete walls in ways that made it impossible to judge distance. Could have been 100 feet back. Could have been right behind me. I reached the first junction and nearly overshot it, boots skidding on wet concrete as I hooked left. My toolbox swung wide and cracked against the wall, the impact jarring up through my arm. I didn't slow down. The whistle sounded again. Closer, definitely closer. And beneath it, a new sound building. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails. Metal on metal, that specific percussion of a train gathering speed. The sound came from tunnels that hadn't held tracks in decades, from rails that had been torn up and sold for scrap before I was born. Didn't matter. The sound was real, getting louder. I could see the stairwell entrance ahead, maybe 100 feet. The metal door with its exit sign, the stairs leading up to street level. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were moving through mud. The train whistle screamed behind me, so loud now it rattled my teeth. I didn't look back. Rule 9 said, find an emergency alcove when you hear the 317, face the wall until it passes. But I'd already violated that. I'd run instead of finding cover. Too late to correct course now. Only option was to get out, get to the surface, get away from whatever was barreling through the darkness at my back, the tunnel filled with sound. Not just the whistle and the wheels anymore. The whole deep rumble of a massive machine in motion, air displacement, brakes squealing, the groan of metal under stress. Wind hit my back, pushing me forward, carrying the smell of hot steel and coal smoke and something else underneath it. Something organic. Rotting. 50 feet to the door. The train's headlight blazed to life behind me, throwing my shadow long and distorted against the tunnel walls ahead. The shadow stretched and stretched, racing me toward the exit. 20 feet. I hit the door with my shoulder, both hands slamming the push bar. The door flew open and I stumbled through, boots hitting the metal landing of the stairwell. I spun around, grabbing the door to pull it shut. The train whistle shrieked one final time, so close the sound felt physical. I slammed the door. The metal clanged shut. The lock engaged automatically. Through the small, reinforced window in the door, I saw light flooding the tunnel. Bright white headlight getting closer. The whole stairwell shook with vibration. My toolbox rattled on the landing where I'd dropped it. Then the light passed the door, moving along the tunnel beyond, and I caught a glimpse of the train itself through that small window. Cars. Passenger cars. Old ones. The kind from archived photos. Windows lit from inside, showing rows of seats, and people in those seats. Figures sitting upright, facing forward. The train roared past and was gone, the light fading, the sound diminishing. The tunnel went dark again beyond the door's window, silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the distance. I stood on the landing, shaking, both hands still gripping the door handle. My breath came in ragged gasps that echoed up and down the stairwell. The tunnel outside looked exactly as it had before. Empty, abandoned. No rails, no train. Just concrete and shadows and the steady glow of fluorescent fixtures that had stopped their sequential flickering. I stayed there for a long time, watching through that window, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I dove into the alcove at full speed, shoulder crashing against the concrete back wall hard enough to knock wind from my lungs. My toolbox clattered across the floor and spilled open. Screwdrivers scattered. The alcove was maybe 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide, just enough space to stand with my face pressed against rough concrete. The light came first. Bright white headlamp glow swept across the tunnel entrance, illuminating the alcove opening in a perfect rectangle of brilliance that moved left to right with mechanical precision. I could see my own shadow thrown against the wall, sharp-edged and black. The light passed. My shadow disappeared back into darkness. Then the brakes. Metal shrieking against metal. That specific high-pitched screech of train wheels locking up, slowing down but not stopping. The sound filled the entire tunnel, bouncing off walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere. My hands went to my ears automatically, but it didn't help. The noise went through bone, vibrated in my teeth. The train passed outside the alcove entrance. I couldn't see it. Wasn't supposed to look. Rule 11 said face the wall until it passes. But I felt it. Air pressure changed, pushed into the alcove space, made my ears pop. The smell came with it. Hot metal, electrical ozone, something else underneath. Old perfume, maybe, cigarette smoke. The scents didn't match, belonged to different decades. Voices rose behind the brake sounds. Passenger murmurs. Dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, words overlapping until individual sentences became impossible to distinguish. A woman laughed. Someone coughed. A child asked a question I couldn't quite hear. Normal commuter sounds. Normal, except these tunnels hadn't carried passengers since 1993. And the voices came from a train that could not exist. The sounds faded gradually. Brakes released with a pneumatic hiss. Wheels began turning again, gathering speed, moving away down the tunnel toward junctions that led nowhere. The voices went with it, conversations continuing into the distance until silence returned. I stayed against the wall counting to 200, following protocol exactly. When I finally turned around, the tunnel was empty. My scattered tools reflected emergency fixture light. The drainage channel held its usual inch of dark water, undisturbed. No evidence anything had passed except the ozone smell still hanging in the recycled air. I gathered my tools with shaking hands, checking each item against mental inventory. Everything accounted for. I clipped the toolbox shut and started walking toward the surface exit, moving faster than regulation allowed. The realization hit me halfway up the metal stairs. I stopped on the landing between level 1 and ground, one hand gripping the condensation slick railing. My headlamp beam pointed at rust-stained concrete. The thought assembled itself piece by piece, each component clicking into place with terrible clarity. The rules weren't protection measures, they were feeding instructions. Don't acknowledge passengers on defunct platforms because acknowledging them gives them something. Provides what, I didn't know, but the protocol ensured interaction happened on specific terms. Give directions to demolished stations without question. Same principle. The entities asked, we answered, transaction completed according to established parameters. Every rule followed the same pattern. Do this, don't do that, perform these exact steps. Not to keep us safe, to keep us compliant, to make sure we fed whatever lived down there in precisely the right way. My stomach turned over. I sat down hard on the metal stairs, toolbox clanking beside me. The 317 train. Rule 11 said, find an alcove, face the wall, wait until it passes. Not run to the surface, not evacuate. Just hide in a specifically marked location and present yourself in a specifically prescribed manner. Stand there while it rolls past. Let it know you're there. Let it sense your presence pressed into that concrete space. Feeding it. All of us. Every worker who followed protocols perfectly. We weren't maintaining infrastructure. We were maintaining something else entirely. I made it to the surface at 1:15 in the morning and went straight to my studio apartment in Bridgeport. Didn't sleep. Sat on my mattress with my phone, searching. Chicago Transit Authority maintenance worker deaths. Chicago tunnel accidents. CTA employee disappearances. Found 3 incidents in the past decade, the ones Chad had mentioned. But when I searched further back, more names appeared. 1997, 2 workers lost in the Lower Wacker extension. 1991, 1 worker removed from service, cause unspecified. 1988, 1 worker transferred to state psychiatric care. I kept searching. 1983, 1979, 1974. The pattern went back 30 years before stopping. Not because incidents stopped, because records before that weren't digitized. The city had been hiring workers for these tunnels, watching them interact with impossible phenomena, documenting what happened when protocols were followed or violated. 30 years of renewable resources. I called in sick the next night. Chad didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. My voice sounded steady enough on the recording. He showed up at my apartment at 9:30 that evening. I opened the door, and he stood in the hallway outside my studio, still wearing his supervisor jacket, carrying his reinforced laptop bag. His pale blue eyes looked tired. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He entered, and I closed the door behind him. My studio didn't have chairs, so we stood near my mattress with my phone still open to search results on the blanket. "You're quitting?" Chad said. Not a question. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, glanced at my phone screen, then back at me. "You figured it out. The rules aren't safety protocols." "No. They're instructions for feeding whatever's down there." Chad set his laptop bag on my floor and rubbed his face with both hands. The scar across his left knuckles showed white against weathered skin. When he dropped his hands, his expression had settled into something resigned. "You want the full truth?" "I want to quit." "Can't do that." His tone stayed flat, bureaucratic. "Not once you've worked long enough to understand what you're doing. Not once the entities have tasted your presence." My apartment felt smaller suddenly. The radiator ticked in the corner. Outside, traffic moved down Halstead with normal city sounds that belong to a normal world. What does that mean? Chad pulled out one of my milk crates. I used them as furniture and sat down heavily. He gestured for me to sit on the mattress. I stayed standing. Means they know you now, he said. You've interacted according to protocols. Gave directions to that woman on the Marshall Fields platform. Hid from the 317 train in a marked alcove. You've fed them properly, followed the rules, completed the transactions. They've registered your presence as part of the system. So I'll stop going down there. Won't matter. Chad's voice carried no emotion, just stated facts. You're in the network now. Chicago's got hundreds of miles of underground infrastructure, sewers, utility tunnels, subway maintenance passages, old freight routes. All connected eventually. All part of the same system. My mouth went dry. You're saying they'll follow me. Already have. You're marked. You go down into any tunnel, any basement deep enough, any underground parking structure that connects to the old networks. They'll find you. They'll expect the same interactions, same protocols, same feeding. I sat down on the mattress then, legs suddenly unsteady. Chad continued, voice still flat. Had a worker try to quit back in 2006. Guy named Michael Harvey. Lasted 3 weeks before he went down into a red line maintenance tunnel to fix a breaker box at his day job. Heard him screaming on the radio about passengers asking for directions. He gave them, followed protocol exactly, then ran. Quit both jobs, moved to Evanston, thought distance would help. He paused, pulled out a protein bar from his jacket, unwrapped it methodically. Found him 6 months later working night security in a building with basement access. Thing is, the entities don't forget. They recognized him soon as he went down there, started asking questions only he could answer about demolished stations and defunct platforms. He tried ignoring them, violated protocols. Security cameras caught him talking to empty hallways, giving directions to nothing visible. Building fired him. Last I heard, he's in the same state facility as the woman who speaks that language nobody recognizes. Chad took a bite of the protein bar, chewed, swallowed. You're in the system now, Edward. The city's been running this operation for at least 30 years, probably longer. Workers come, workers go. Some follow rules and last year's, some violate protocols and end up in facilities or disappeared. But nobody quits. Not once they're marked. The entities have tasted your presence. You're part of their maintenance contract now. He stood up, picked up his laptop bag. Shift starts at 10. I'll see you at the supply station. He walked to my door, opened it, paused in the threshold. For what it's worth, you're good at following protocols. Keep doing that, you'll be fine. It's just a job. Same as any other once you accept the terms. The door closed behind him. His footsteps receded down the hallway. I sat on my mattress in my $900 studio apartment, 2 months behind on electric bills, with a dead transmission in my car and $417 in my checking account. The radiator ticked. Traffic moved on Halstead. My phone screen had gone dark. I thought about the woman's footprints ending at solid concrete, about Axel Montgomery losing 17 days in minutes, about entities that tasted presence and followed workers through hundreds of miles of connected underground infrastructure spanning the entire city, about renewable resources in an ongoing supernatural maintenance contract. My shift started at 10. It was 9:45. I stood up, grabbed my steel-toed boots, and started getting ready for work. I spent that shift walking the tunnels with my headlamp beams sweeping concrete and my mind running calculations that wouldn't balance. Chad gave me routine assignments, checking junction boxes in Section 7, replacing battery backups near the old State Street platforms, documenting water damage in the Eastern Passage. Standard maintenance work. Nothing that required protocols. But I couldn't stop thinking about the connections. Lower Wacker was just one piece. The old Blue Line extension connected to freight tunnels running under the loop, which connected to utility passages serving buildings torn down in the 70s. Those passages connected to storm drains that fed into older brick sewers built before the city reversed the river. Every piece linked to another piece, forming a network that spread under Chicago's grid in patterns the official maps didn't show. I'd seen parts of it on Chad's map, the one with symbols marking demolished stations and closed junctions, but that map only covered transit infrastructure, didn't show the steam tunnels connecting hospitals, or the utility passages under Millennium Park, or the abandoned pedestrian walkways that used to link department stores during Prohibition. During my lunch break, I sat in the supply station with my phone searching municipal records and historical documents. Found references to tunnel construction dating back to 1893, to freight passages built for the World's Fair, to utility corridors added during the 20s and 30s and 40s. Each decade added more underground space. Each expansion connected to what already existed. The system wasn't one thing. It was hundreds of separate projects that had merged over a century into something vast and unmapped. I pulled up storm drain schematics from the city's public works database, traced the paths under Bridgeport, under my neighborhood, under my apartment building. The main trunk line ran 3 blocks west of my studio. Smaller branches fed into it from every direction, carrying runoff from streets and alleys into the larger network. My building had a basement, probably had a sump pump connected to the storm system. I set my phone down on the metal counter and stared at the fluorescent fixture above me. Chad had said the entities knew me now, that I'd interacted with them following protocols on Marshall Field's platform and in the emergency alcove, that I was part of the system marked within hundreds of miles of connected infrastructure. Hundreds of miles. Not just the transit tunnels, not just Lower Wacker and the defunct stations, everything underground. Every passage and drain and utility corridor that touched another passage or drain or utility corridor until the whole network became one continuous space. I picked up my phone again and searched for the boundaries. Found maps showing where Chicago's infrastructure ended at city limits, where systems transitioned to suburban jurisdiction, where old tunnels had been sealed during annexation disputes. But the seals were just concrete barriers. Same kind of barrier that closed the Marshall Field's platform in 1987, the one with wet footprints leading straight through it. I thought about Axel Montgomery climbing into that freight elevator shaft, spending 17 days in a space that felt like 15 minutes. Time worked differently down here. Distance probably did too. A tunnel that ran 300 feet on the official map might stretch further when you walked it at 3 a.m. with your headlamp battery running low. The ecosystem wasn't limited by geography. It was limited by connection, by whether one underground space could reach another through passages that existed on terms I didn't understand. My phone showed 42% battery. I closed the browser and clipped it back to my belt next to the laminated rules card. Chad's voice crackled through my walkie-talkie at 2:30 a.m. Check in. Section 7 complete, I said. Moving to Section 9 for the air quality sensors. Copy. I walked east through the main passage, my toolbox handle slick with condensation. Counted the emergency alcoves as I passed them, yellow reflective tape marking each recess every 100 feet. Followed the route I'd memorized my first week, turning at junctions I could navigate in complete darkness if the fixtures failed. But I kept thinking about what happened if I tried to leave. Chad had said I couldn't quit once entities had tasted my presence. That Michael Harvey tried quitting in 2006 and got found in any underground location until he violated protocols and ended up in a state facility. Any underground location, not just CTA tunnels, not just the places covered by my work assignments. Anywhere with a connection to the network, which meant anywhere with a basement, a sewer access, a utility corridor, a storm drain. I stopped walking at a junction where 3 passages converged. My headlamp beam swept across familiar graffiti from the 90s, water stains forming patterns on concrete, drainage channels carrying their constant inch of dark water. Breaking the contract meant the entities didn't stop. They just stopped getting what they needed through controlled protocol interactions, and then they'd come looking for it on their own terms. I thought about the woman on Marshall Field's platform asking for directions to Quincy Station, her footprints ending at solid concrete. Rule 16 said, give directions to demolish stations without question, which meant entities needed those directions, needed that interaction, needed workers to maintain the transaction. The protocols fed them in measured doses, kept them satisfied enough not to hunt. Remove the protocols and you remove the feeding schedule. The hunger wouldn't disappear. It would just become unregulated. I started walking again, faster than necessary, my boots splashing through shallow water. Michael Harvey lasted until he violated protocols, until he broke the rules and gave entities permission to take something outside the standard transactions. Then he became permanent, stuck in a state facility, screaming when taken above ground, serving something that wouldn't let him go. The others too. The worker from 1991 transferred to psychiatric care, the two from 1997 who vanished completely. Going back through decades of incidents where workers either followed protocols and survived or broke them and became permanent resources for things that existed in spaces between Chicago's official maps. I reached Section 9 and found the air quality sensor box mounted on the wall. Opened the metal cover and checked the readings. All green, all normal. Just routine maintenance in an impossible place where trains ran through tunnels without tracks and time moved in 17-day chunks that felt like 15 minutes. My walkie-talkie stayed silent. Chad would expect another check-in at 3 a.m. I closed the sensor box and stood in the tunnel with my toolbox at my feet. The impossible choice wasn't really a choice. That's what made it perfect. I could keep working, keep following protocols, keep serving as bait for supernatural entities while collecting $28 per hour plus hazard pay that Chad had mentioned would kick in after my first month. That put me around $42 per hour for a 40-hour week. $168 per shift, $672 per week, $2,688 per month. More than double what I'd made managing the restaurant before COVID shut everything down. Enough to catch up on my electric bills in one paycheck, enough to fix my car's transmission in two, enough to move out of the $900 studio in Bridgeport within 3 months if I saved carefully. All I had to do was keep following rules that fed things waiting on defunct platforms and riding phantom trains through abandoned infrastructure, or I could quit. Walk away. Spend the rest of my life avoiding every underground space in Chicago while being hunted by passengers who would never reach their destinations. No basements, no parking garages, no subway platforms or pedway tunnels or lower Wacker or underground shopping concourses. No red line or blue line or anywhere with stairs leading down. Nothing that connected to the network. In a city built on swampland, engineered with underground infrastructure on every block, covering 234 square miles of connected passages and drains and utility corridors. I'd last maybe a week before I forgot and walked into the wrong building, stepped into the wrong elevator, took shelter from the wrong rainstorm in the wrong tunnel. And then the entities would find me without protocols to regulate the interaction. I picked up my toolbox and started walking back toward the supply station. The city had engineered this perfectly, not through malice, through economics. Through the simple math of desperate people and limited options and infrastructure that needed maintenance regardless of what lived in it. Find workers with nowhere else to go. Workers who'd spent 4 months sending out 200 applications for 3 interviews. Workers living in cheap studios, 2 months behind on bills, with broken down cars and emptied savings accounts. Workers who understood that walking away meant something worse than staying. Then give them protocols. Give them rules that created controlled interactions. Give them hazard pay that made survival possible again. The workers became renewable resources, trapped in supernatural servitude, maintaining a delicate balance that kept entities contained but never eliminated, because eliminating them wasn't the goal. Containment was the goal. Regulation was the goal. Keeping them fed on measured terms so they didn't hunt on their own, and workers like me kept the feeding schedule running. I reached the supply station at 2:55 a.m., set my toolbox on the counter, and pulled out my walkie-talkie for the scheduled check-in, but I didn't press the button yet. I unclipped the laminated rules card from my belt instead, held it under the fluorescent light, and read through all 16 protocols again, each one a feeding instruction, each one a transaction where I gave something to entities in exchange for being allowed to leave at shift end. Don't acknowledge passengers, don't follow sounds, don't enter certain spaces, hide when the train comes, give directions when asked, perform the rituals correctly and go home safely. Break them and become permanent. I turned the card over in my hand. The laminated surface caught the light, making the text shimmer slightly. Playing card sized, hole punched, attached to a metal ring I could clip to my belt for easy access during emergencies. My walkie-talkie crackled. "Check in," Chad said. I held the rules card and didn't answer. From somewhere in the tunnels behind me, distant but growing closer, I heard the low whistle of the 317 train. I set the walkie-talkie down on the supply station counter without responding to Chad's check-in call. The distant whistle grew louder from somewhere in the eastern passage. The 317 train, making its impossible approach through tunnels that hadn't carried rails in 27 years. My hand went to the laminated rules card clipped to my belt. Rule 11 said, "Find an emergency alcove, face the wall, don't turn around until the train passes." Every protocol designed to keep me breathing, to send me home at dawn with my paycheck intact. I unclipped the card from my belt and laid it beside the walkie-talkie. The whistle echoed through the junction system, bouncing off concrete walls and growing closer with each second. I could hear the rhythmic clatter now, wheels on phantom tracks, the screech of old brakes beginning their approach to a station that didn't exist anymore. My toolbox sat at my feet. 42% battery on my phone, 2 months behind on electric bills, and $417 keeping me from eviction. I picked up my toolbox and walked toward the Marshall Fields platform. The burgundy and cream tiles came into view first. Art Deco patterns from a station that closed before I was born. My boots echoed against concrete as I stepped up onto the platform itself, setting my toolbox down near the edge where the tracks used to run. The whistle filled the tunnel now. Not approaching anymore. Arriving. White light swept around the corner from the eastern passage, bright and mechanical, casting my shadow long across the platform tiles. The brake sounds intensified, metal on metal, pneumatic hiss, the screech of a train that shouldn't exist slowing for a stop it had no reason to make. I stood there facing the tunnel opening, not hiding in an alcove, not turning away. The train emerged into view. It looked solid, real. 6 cars long with the old 2400 series design, boxy steel bodies painted in faded CTA brown and cream, destination signs above the windows showing routes that hadn't run since 1993. The headlamp blazed white and painful, forcing me to squint as the train slowed, brakes screaming, until it stopped perfectly aligned with the platform edge. The headlamp dimmed. I could see through the windows now. People sat in the seats, dozens of them. Men in suits from different decades, women in dresses that hadn't been fashionable since before I was born, a kid in a Cubs jacket from the 80s. They didn't move, didn't turn their heads, just sat there staring straight ahead with glassy eyes that reflected the emergency fixture light. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Warm air rolled out, carrying that same smell from before. Hot metal, ozone, old perfume, cigarette smoke from eras that didn't overlap. A woman stood just inside the first car wearing a conductor's uniform, her dark brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, her eyes distant and unfocused. Naomi Bush. I recognized her from the incident reports I'd searched, from the list of workers who'd supposedly quit. She didn't speak, just stood there holding a ticket punch, her uniform appearing both solid and translucent depending on how the light hit it. I looked past her into the train car. A man in maintenance coveralls stood near the center doors, tall and broad-shouldered with gray at his temples, his face vacant and expressionless. Michael Harvey, the worker Chad mentioned who'd tried quitting in 2006. In the second car, visible through the connecting door, another figure moved through the aisle checking overhead fixtures. Slim build, black hair hanging past his collar, movements mechanical and precise. Axel Montgomery, the guy who'd climbed into the forbidden shaft and lost 17 days. The train sat there idling, doors open, waiting. More faces filled the other cars. Dozens of workers I didn't recognize, all wearing uniforms from different decades of CTA service, all moving through their eternal routines with empty eyes and automatic gestures. Some jobs don't end with 2 weeks' notice. I picked up my toolbox. Naomi's glassy eyes shifted slightly, tracking my movement without her head turning. Michael remained motionless in his maintenance coveralls. Through the windows, I could see the seated passengers still staring straight ahead, trapped in their commutes to demolished stations and impossible destinations. The train hummed, a low frequency I felt in my chest. The doors remained open. I thought about my studio apartment in Bridgeport. $417, dead transmission. Electric bills I couldn't pay. 200 job applications with 3 interviews. The restaurant that failed in summer 2020, taking everything I'd saved with it. I thought about Chad's words. Once they've tasted your presence, once you're part of the system. The 317 train didn't hunt you, it collected you. I stepped forward to the platform edge, my steel-toed boots 6 inches from the gap between concrete and phantom train floor. My toolbox felt heavy in my hand. Multi-tool still clipped to my belt, laminated rules card abandoned on the supply station counter where it couldn't help me anymore. Naomi stood waiting with her ticket punch. Behind her, Michael Harvey swayed slightly with the train's idle vibration. Axel Montgomery moved through the second car like he'd been doing maintenance checks for years instead of vanishing 2 springs ago. The city needed workers. The infrastructure required maintenance. And Chicago's underground network, all those hundreds of miles of connected tunnels and sewers and forgotten passages, needed renewable resources to keep the ecosystem functioning. I'd followed the protocols, given directions on this exact platform, hidden in an alcove when the train passed, fed the system through regulated interactions. Now, the system was feeding on me. I stepped across the gap. My boot hit the train floor solid, no different from stepping onto the red line during my normal life above ground. The metal felt real beneath my feet. The warm air surrounded me, thick with impossible smells. Naomi stood 3 feet away, still holding her ticket punch, her ponytail hanging perfectly still despite the ventilation. The doors closed behind me with a pneumatic hiss. I turned around and looked through the window at the Marshall Fields platform. Burgundy and cream tiles, emergency fixture casting yellow light, my shadow visible on the concrete where I'd stood seconds ago. The train lurched forward. I grabbed an overhead rail to steady myself, my toolbox swinging against my leg. The platform slid past the windows, then the tunnel wall, then darkness as we accelerated into passages that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Naomi moved down the aisle past me without acknowledgement, her conductor's uniform shifting between solid and translucent with each step. I stood near the doors holding the rail, watching the tunnel darkness rush past outside. Michael Harvey appeared from the second car, walking with mechanical precision toward the rear of the train. He passed within a foot of me. His eyes stayed vacant, looking through me rather than at me. His maintenance coveralls smelling like ozone and old grease. The train swayed through an impossible turn. No tracks existed in these tunnels. No rails had carried wheels here since 1993. But the 317 ran its route anyway, stopping at demolished stations, collecting workers who'd fed the system long enough to become part of it. I looked at the seated passengers, the woman in the 60s dress, the man in the 80s suit, the kid in the Cubs jacket, all of them staring straight ahead with glassy eyes, riding toward destinations that didn't exist anymore. The train accelerated, wheels clattering against phantom rails, heading deeper into Chicago's underground network where the city maintained its infrastructure through workers who never clocked out, never went home, never stopped their shifts in the hidden system beneath the streets. My phone showed 42% battery. My toolbox contained everything I'd need for maintenance work. And somewhere above us, Chad would mark me down in his incident reports as another worker who'd lasted exactly 11 days before the protocol stopped protecting and started collecting. The 317 train carried me through darkness toward eternal shifts in tunnels that borrowed time, served entities that fed on presence, and required workers who'd accepted jobs they couldn't quit. Some employment contracts don't end. They just change location.